Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about seniors and juniors and the differences between the two. So let's get into it. So the question in question today was pretty much, Frederick, what is, like, how big of a difference is it between the perspective of a junior that has, maybe a year or something, maybe they're on their first year or something like that, and the experience level of a senior who's been working for many, many years, maybe, 5, 10, 20 years, something like that, right? And are there challenges that they both face? So I think this is an excellent question, and I will just get to it. The thing that they both face is pretty much the daily job, depending, of course, of what you mean about senior 20 years and kind of their role. Something that you should know is that it's extremely common that a developer at some point starts to expand outside of their role as a programmer. Now, most developers, they start their career as someone who simply writes code. That's their focus, right? But at some point you might transition into some type of tech lead role or some type of semi-management role. You might become an architect or something like that, where your responsibility is not just to write code, but it is to manage teams. It might be to set up architectures and technical specifications, and basically your knowledge has gotten to a point where you're actually requested, or like people want you to take a responsibility that affects more people than just you on a daily basis. So that's something that a junior will never get. Not in the beginning of things. It doesn't matter how good you are of a software developer, it is extremely unlikely that you as a junior, even if you are the best coder who was ever born, that you will get to be immediately in a position where your company is just going to go, hey, you know what? We just hired this person over here. We're going to have them set our new technical architecture that we're going to work towards for the next quarter or like the next year or something like that. Usually it's not something that you will face. Now, when it comes to the perspective on these sorts of things, it's also tied into a very similar sort of thing, actually, because the difference of perspective here, you can kind of think of it as the perspective between a teenager and a senior citizen, a retiree, if you will. The core thing that I'm trying to say to you here is that I don't want you to think that junior means naive or bad or something like that, and senior just means better. That's not what it's about. The differences is usually most tangible, not in necessarily how smart somebody is. Because the thing is, guys, there are seniors who have been working their entire career in software development, and they're still not as smart as some of the college kids that go and graduate today. It doesn't, just because you're fresh out of college, that doesn't mean that you don't have anything to provide. You have a value. I know it's hard to believe that, because in those days, when you're at that stage, everything is about work experience. And that's the thing that you're going to be freaking out about. But that doesn't mean that you're stupid. It doesn't mean that the person who has more work experience than you is smarter than you. That's not what it's about. It's just that they are more experienced. They have seen the world. They can answer questions, and they have an understanding of things that you do not have. You will get there, but you're not there today. So that's something I need to make very clear. It's not about being stupid or smart, because when you have the perspective of a senior, what you usually get is a more holistic picture, a more holistic understanding of the problem that you are solving, or considerations from somebody who has years of experience, who have seen similar situations or things that are relevant to the here and now. A junior does not have that. You may have the brains to solve a specific problem, but you do not have the foresight or the experience to know how your choices now are very likely to play out, what the following steps are going to be. You can only think one step ahead because you have never been on step two. So my favorite way to, I suppose, describe this would be to say that if you have a textbook problem, if you have a, let's say for the sake of argument, that you're going to implement an algorithm, and that algorithm is almost a perfect fit for a theoretical textbook problem that you teach in school or something like that. And this, this is actually, I would even go as far as to say that this is true for all education. It doesn't just have to do with programming. But let's, for the sake of argument, say that that's the case, right? In that scenario, it is extremely likely that the junior who has just graduated and the senior, depending on senior, of course, I mean, they could have gotten complacent many years ago, but they will very likely arrive at the same conclusion when they look at this problem, because the problem is a perfect fit for a solution that they both have a fairly equal experience level with, because it's a textbook problem. And that's the beautiful part about a textbook problem. It's something that is so perfectly fitted into something that has been described in theory very extensively that you can just assume that, oh yeah, this problem is solved in this fashion. Now, this is usually how some interview questions and stuff like that actually go. Quite a few of them are textbook problems. However, if you get to a problem where it's not a textbook problem, it is a problem that is sort of a textbook problem, or it's something where you need actual creative thought at the very least, you need to think about this problem from a broader perspective. Then things start to change. That's when it starts to make a real difference between the senior and the junior, because the junior does not have this. As I said, it's not that they don't have the brains to understand a problem, or not that they're not smart. It's just that they will make a choice based on less information, less experience than that of the senior. Now, what usually happens in this sort of scenario is that it's kind of like a crapshoot for a junior many times. You will implement something, and even if you think that it's genius, it's very often not. It's actually it's very rare that a junior who comes up with this amazing idea to a really complicated problem or something like that will solve it in a fashion that actually pans out all that well. Simply because they, as I like to call it, they don't know, they don't understand the real problem. And that's what the senior will understand. An example of this would be that quite a few of I had a talk with a person who reached out to me regarding Storybook and standard components. And I spoke to this person, and they explained that, yeah, so our company wanted to standardize their component library in this scenario. And so we added Storybook, and we started standardizing all the components, and we went, and they told me about all the plugins that they had added and so forth and so forth. And I wrote back and I asked them, how did that turn out for you? And they responded by saying that, yeah, no, nobody uses it. And then I nodded to myself. I nodded to myself. They don't know this, but I just nodded to myself, and I went, that's exactly what I expected to happen. And then I wrote back and I said, you see, the problem is that you tried to solve a problem that you didn't understand. And what I mean, and I told them what I mean by that is simply that you thought that when your company said that they want a standard component library, because everybody wants a standard component library, and do you know why they want that? Is it because of you guys? No, it is because that in theory will allow the business to feel that we're going to move as quickly as possible, because standard components are easier to reuse, and reuse means that it takes less time, and there are less inconsistencies, there is less regression testing, like all of these things. That's why reuse is so popular within the business world. Programmers feel a very similar thing. The problem isn't that this doesn't have a value. The problem is that you need to convince every single person in your company to use that workflow. In other words, your problem isn't that you can't add a standard component to your project. Your problem is to overhaul the internal development process to a point where these components are so well made and so embedded in the company culture that they become the default for everybody, not just the developers, even the salespeople needs to be on board with the idea that this is what we're going to do. You don't come to us and give us like one-off solutions every single time, because if you do that, you can't standardize on anything, and they will do that, design, and they will have their own ideas. So you will kind of, sometimes you have to push them into using the standard components, and sometimes they have to push for the same thing, and these things take time. So that's the real problem. The real problem isn't that you didn't use Storybook. The problem wasn't that you weren't using Storybook. The real problem was that you didn't have an internal process for standardization at your company, and that can be solved in many, many ways. But a junior does not understand that, because they haven't worked for several years and seen that, because, I mean, that's how everybody starts out. You try it out and you see what happens, and then when you're on the other side of things, you learn from those mistakes. And that's pretty much the difference in the perspective right there. A junior has nothing in terms of experience when they start looking at a problem, except for what they learned in school or in theory and so forth. And a senior has pretty much the same sort of thing, but with 20-something years of failure and successes to weigh in on the decisions that they make. So what I want you to take away from this is that the perspective between a junior and a senior is quite large on a problem that is liquid, or it's a problem that is non-textbook. A textbook problem, most of them will come up with the same sort of solution. But for most problems, because most problems are not textbook, the senior will have a much more in-depth understanding of the problem that is being solved, and they are much more likely to actually solve it in an effective fashion. I actually read, and I sort of agree with this, that any project, any large-scale system development project that lacks senior experience is all but doomed to fail. To a point, I will agree that with this, because it is sometimes so incredibly hard to foresee the outcome of technical decisions that it usually ends up with you making something that is genius, but it doesn't actually pan out the way that you think it should do. And that's where a senior's perspective is the most valuable. But it's not about being smarter than somebody else. It is about work experience and life experience versus youth. Have a great day.